Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of Inside the Birds. I'm Geoff Mosher, and it is that time of the year where free agency is right around the corner, and we start to talk not about just evaluation, but valuation, the type of contracts free agents are going to get. The Eagles have several in-house free agents who are probably going to command a lot of money coming off a Super Bowl championship. So, backed by popular demand, we bring in our analytics reporter, Sam Finkel, who has done excellent work for us in the past, both on the pod platform and insidethebirds.com, of using predictive models to try to figure out what players are going to make on the open market. And that seems very, Sam, as we bring you in here, really, really important in the next coming days, as the Eagles have four major guys and then some other ones we'll get into throughout the week that are in line for a pretty good payday. And it's our job to try to figure out whether the Eagles can make this happen or not. So are you ready for this? You excited?
Let's do it. I'm very excited.
All right. So we always have a ton of new listeners. So even though we've had you kind of discuss this in the past, I'd like you to re-discuss or re-point out the way you come up with this predictive models, what goes into it, and just so that people know in the past, and it's available on insidethebirds.com. Sam has done an excellent job of nailing some right on the head and getting really in the ballpark of what guys are going to make on the open market or re-signing with their team.
Sure. Yeah. So the methodology that I use could be called contextual contract year analysis. So what that actually means is we use the contract year, so the platform year, the last year before they are able to sign, and we look at that with relevant historical, but we generally focus on active and recent contracts. So it's not like contracts too far away. And we look at those market comps to determine the value. So this is a good methodology, and it's one that is pretty much used throughout actually multiple sports leagues, not just the NFL. Most of it probably started in baseball. They were the first that were really good at using statistics to predict value. But the problem with this model, I will say, it's a double-edged sword with recency bias. And I think that's kind of how the league operates too. What have you done for me lately, right? So looking at this kind of data just on its face leads to some issues, because you need to make sure that you're consistent throughout your career or you didn't have a fluke year. So what happens is sometimes these models will over or underinflate a player based on their platform year. So that's where the context really comes in, and you have to be a little bit more subjective and look at the full body of work. And we kind of do that through other ways in the modeling. But what we do is we look at key statistics at each relative position to ensure that they really encompass the entire position. For instance, we try to capture for defensive line, depending on if it's tackle or edge, we try to, capture both the run game and the pass game if possible. But obviously, for edge, we're trying to get as much of the pass game as possible captured. So this is essentially the same as the algorithm that I've used in the past. The only difference with the way we did it today, is there's no linear regression model behind it. It's for quarterback and receiver, we have that capability. We're working on, expanding that capability. But right now, that's the only really major difference. And I'm excited to get into this.
Well, I appreciate how you contextualize it for two reasons. One, I think everybody needs to know that just like NFL scouting is not an exact science, you are not responsible for coming up with a great predictive model based on all this data, and then a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars, like they did with Christian Kirk, just saying, screw all that, we are going to just go for broke and put it all in on one player and totally reset the market. I know that that's stuff that's very difficult to account for when you're doing predictive modeling, because it's sort of the outlier that throws everything off. And that is always the potential with any free agent. And two, to the point you were making about year by year and how the flaw in that can become if there's a fluke year or not. Well, I'm going to challenge you right off the spot, because our first two guys we're going to talk about are Zack Baun and Mekhi Becton. And there is no greater argument for the whole flash in the pan year or not having years worth of, results one way or another. Obviously, Mekhi Becton played for a while for the Jets, but he didn't play very well. Him playing at the level that he played at, there's not a long track or record of it. So these are both guys as we get into this, Sam, who have had really good seasons, Baun a great season, but have shorter resumes than maybe some other players at their position that are about to be in free agency. And of course, that is for NFL personnel people to figure out what is real, what's not real, and what the valuation is to the evaluation. So good stuff there. And let us start right off the bat with the number one guy, certainly for Eagles fans, and that is Zack Baun, who is also sort of the, I guess, the number one curiosity that I think people have around the league as what is this guy going to command on the market? So what did your predictive model tell you?
Yeah, so I will say with Baun, it's a really tough one because of exactly what you said. That he just has not had the body of work. There's no sample size that will say guarantee that he'll continue to have this production. That being said, if you look at the comps, he blows every comp out of the water. So if you look at the highest, and we, by the way, this is an important distinction too. We're doing it average per year. That's not technically how the league, like, and the teams actually look at it, but for a fan perspective, it's the easiest to understand the deals. So that's why we do average per year and average annual value. So that's why we stick to that statistic. But if you look at Roquan Smith, the 2023 contract, he's 20 million a year, and Baun beats him in almost every statistic except for missed tackle percentage. And that's a theme you see throughout all the comps I pulled for Baun.
Right.
So really, I mean, based on just the eye test and that, if this was his body of work, he would be the highest paid linebacker in the NFL. And that's a crazy thing to say, especially for the Eagles to have someone that is worth potentially the highest paid linebacker in the entire league.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I was going to just emphasize, especially for the Eagles. I mean, as good as a year that TJ Edwards had 2 years ago and made a nice salary in free agency, it was Tremaine Edmonds who made even more on the free agent market that year from the same team, the Bears, with an AAV of $18 million a year. So what do you see for Zack Baun? What does the predictive model tell you?
Yeah, so I think for Baun, it would be anywhere from 10 to 11.5 million. And the thing is, like, it's a little bit difficult because I think his ceiling is probably Jeremiah Owusu Koromoa. I think that's which is 12.5 million. And I think his floor is Foye Oluokun.
Jaguars. Yep.
Yeah, and I think that anywhere between those would be fair. I think you have to consider, and that's 10 to 12.5 million, by the way. So I think he'll probably get a little bit less than that, but I think that's where the model seems to like him. And I think part of the things that'll boost him is obviously the All-Pro season, playoff performance, Super Bowl champion, and the scarcity. He's the top choice in the linebacker pool. If you look at his free agent rank, he was first in 1, 2, 3, 4 categories, second in another, fourth in 2 more, and ninth in missed tackle. Missed tackle was the only stat that he did not have a top 5 metric in. But what's going to hurt him is the sample size. Again, his body of work. Like if you look at Roquan Smith and those top of the line people, they had a significant career before that, and they had a bunch of accolades, and it would be much easier to justify that salary. And the other thing that's going to hurt him is age, right? He's 28. And if you look at this market, only 2 guys that I pulled were 28 and everyone else was younger. So I think that's an important distinction that's probably going to bring him down quite a bit. And the body of work thing will bring him down a bit. He is a curiosity. I really like how you said that, because that is exactly what he is.
So if we're going to forecast a little bit and talk about him being in that 10 to $12.5 million a year range, I think the arrow in that regard, and we can only speculate based on history and knowledge, would be that to me points the arrow to the Eagles being able to re-sign him. We've heard Howie Roseman talk about we've heard him talk about adapting and being willing to think outside the box for the importance of the team. Let's go back to 2017. They had Nigel Bradham play at a really high level when they won their first Super Bowl, and they made it work with Nigel on what was a 3-year deal, but what felt more like a 2-year deal with most of the money in year 1. And I imagine here with Zack Baun, they can probably, if that's close to the AAV, what it's going to be, then I feel like the Eagles would probably be able to do something that made that work too, where a lot of the money is in year one or year two. Although lately they've been doing some strange stuff with, option bonuses and backloaded, but I don't think we're talking about that with Zack Baun, where you're getting that 7-year deal and 3 dummy years. This is not an edge rusher, not a quarterback. It's a linebacker. So I don't think the philosophy on linebacker for them will change, but I do see an avenue where they're willing to pay some early money now to keep a guy like Zack Baun in-house for at least the next 2 years.
I really wouldn't be surprised if you said that they locked him up for a long-term deal or if they locked him up for another 1 or 2 year deal. And I think the logic from Baun's camp is if you're doing a short-term deal, we can continue playing at this pace and then make a bag after that.
Great point.
Or if he feels very secure in the Fangio defense and Fangio has expressed interest in staying in Philadelphia long term, you might as well try to finish your career here, finish strong, get what you can. So I really wouldn't be surprised from his perspective if they go either way.
Yeah, that is a great point, and I'm sure with that kind of philosophy, Baun's probably hating on the Saints right now for wasting the first 4 to 5 years of his career. Because if he was 26 or 27 and the market just wasn't there for an all-pro linebacker because of lack of sample size or resume, yes, that would be a perfect candidate for a 1 year 2 deal. Show that you can do it again. Maybe you're not an all-pro again, but show that you're a good linebacker for another year or two and you can hit another bag. If you did that this time and you're 30, and even if you're coming off 3 total good years, you're still going to be looking like a 30-year-old linebacker. However, and we'll finish it off on this, there are some teams that are known to pay inside linebackers, or some coaches who are known to pay inside linebackers more than another. In fact, the Saints signed Mario Davis for, I think, a pretty decent deal a year or two ago when he was in his 30s because he proved he was still a very good player. And so we'll see. I think that the fact that the Ravens and the Steelers, Sam, who traditionally put big money into linebacker, have already invested, as you mentioned, the Ravens into Roquan Smith, the Steelers into Patrick Queen. Dennis Allen right now is with the Bears, I think, but they've put money into Tremaine Edwards and TJ. It makes me wonder, like the last guy I can think of who I think would put money organization or guy would be Vrabel with the Patriots, but I know that they really want to focus up front more than that interior. So it may be a case where this model really is dead on, that Zach's not going to get the 17, 18, 19 that somebody else who had done what he's done for 2 or 3 years and was 25 or 26 would get.
Absolutely.
All right, good stuff. So that is Zack Baun, and I think the listeners who are the Eagles fans will be very happy with that predictive model, because I definitely think the arrow would point toward the Eagles on that. Let us go to Mekhi Becton now, who's another interesting case study. I mean, sort of like Baun, Sam. This is a guy who did switch positions. Baun was an edge rusher / special teams guy who moved to inside linebacker. Becton was a offensive tackle all of his life who moved to guard and played there at a pretty decent level for the Eagles this year. What does your model tell you about what you think he might make?
Yeah, it's really anywhere between 8 to 13.25, which is not really an exact, it's a pretty wide range. So yeah. I think you can kind of narrow that a little bit more to like 9 to 12.5 million and feel pretty comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
I really like how you described Becton again. The one thing I will say that you didn't mention is just the insane size he has for guard. And that's makes him a curiosity too.
Yep.
I just think it's so interesting. You don't see that very often, if at all.
No, in fact, when you look at most of the top paid guards in the league, they were really guards, whether it's Lidstrom, Trey Smith just became franchise tagged, right, at something like $23 million a year. Robert Hunt, I believe, has always been a guard. Cosme was a tackle in college, but I believe the Commanders moved him to guard pretty early. He might be one example, but he's not a mammoth guy like Becton is. You're right. This is a guy who sort of doesn't meet the size, weight measurement comps that other guards have. And I guess different teams will value that differently.
And size is his other issue with the sample size issue, as that you kind of hinted at.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, if you are Becton, do you want to leave Philadelphia, the first place that you've actually found success? Are people going to look at his contract and at his numbers and say, you just benefited because you were in Stoutland's offense, you were in that scheme, you had the coaching of obviously Stoutland, and that's what the market might look at, fair or not. I think that is a consideration that other teams may have that point the arrow in favor of the Eagles.
I would think, I look at this two ways. 9 to 12 is not top 5 or even top 10 guard money. So I would understand why you would want to point the arrow to the Eagles on that. Because in a sense, you're getting a guy who's flourished for you and played at a high level for not top 10 money. But the other part that makes the arrow go the other way, and we're going to get into this later in the week, is that the Eagles already have Landon Dickerson, already have Lane Johnson on top echelon money. They're probably going to redo Jordan Mailata at some point. I don't think his agent's going to allow him to play on that middle tier left tackle money when he's coming off of a very good year. And then Cam Jurgens is a guy coming off now. I think he was second team All-Pro, who is going to have his contract. Well, not have to, but the Eagles are going to want to extend him after year 3. And you got to think he's going to fall maybe a little short of Creed Humphrey, but he's going to be top 5, top 8. I don't know of any team that has all 5 offensive linemen in that top 8 to top 10 tier. So even $9 million a year, even if it's just 1 or 2 years for Mekhi Becton, Sam, might make the Eagles say, we just can't do that because we sort of got you out of nothing. We've got Tyler Steen there. We can always draft. We need to save money. It's got to be spread around. And this is the area we feel that we're pretty good at developing and drafting and finding bargains like we did with Mekhi.
And honestly, you saying that kind of makes sense from an organizational perspective when you also look at his statistics. And I will caveat and say that guard, really any offensive line is really hard to contextualize with statistics, just because there's very few statistics that are tracked for offensive linemen. And so the ones that are, and the ones we've talked about, a bunch while just talking about anything in the show and, writing articles, is the pressure, the win rate. And the only thing I could add was the rushing numbers because I thought that was important and it wasn't captured adequately. And you look at his statistics compared to the league and compared to the free agent guard market, and the Eagles could very well just say, thank you for your service. Thank you for the Super Bowl. Take a ring and hopefully you find success somewhere else.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't top 20 in any statistic for the league. And he's only top 10 for, I guess he's top 10 for three out of the 5 statistics we used for the free agent market. So the statistics are really not great on their face. And again, it's really difficult to contextualize, value from an offensive lineman. But what we do have doesn't look necessarily great.
Right. I think maybe if he got to a place where the AAV was like $5 to $6 million a year, which I know sounds kind of ludicrous, but I mean, that's Kevin Zeitler money. He's much older, but he's a good guard. He's been a good guard, Zeitler, for most of his career. And I just think that there will be questions about, can Mekhi Becton come into my program if I'm not the Eagles and be a difference maker worthy of being an $8+ million a year player when he only did it for 1 year surrounded by 4 guys who are all really good at their position and, coached by one of the best in the business. Now, I do think that, let's say you're a team like the Rams. You run a ton of duo, ton of inside zone. They used to be a wide zone team, but they've switched, right? They loaded up on bigger offensive linemen, and they pound the ball at the middle with Kyron Williams, and they're going to want to keep Matthew Stafford now protected. I could see if they had the money there. You're adding a piece to what you already feel is a pretty good offensive line. They have Alaric Jackson. They have Avila, right? I don't think you're signing Mekhi Becton to be the savior of your offensive line. I think you're signing Mekhi Becton if you just one piece away, you think, from really being competitive, and you like to run the ball. 49ers, Rams, Steelers, maybe, although the Steelers typically go younger and through the draft. But that's the type of team, Ravens, something like that, where I think Mekhi would fit in, and a team might find some money to pay him. But again, I agree. I think your model makes a lot of sense because of his true lack of a resume here. 9 to 12 and a half. If he got 12 and a half, he should take it and be really excited about that. 9, I think, is even pretty good. But even if he got lower, I wouldn't be surprised.
I wouldn't be either. Again, this is just like what the market has dictated based on, past precedents of contracts.
Right.
Doesn't mean that he's going to get it though. And I
Right.
think it's a really good point, and I think you're absolutely right.
And we should also point out, like, the outlier works both ways, right? It works where there's that one team that just wants to completely blow everybody else out of the way and reset the market for an average player, right? We've seen that constantly. But if you remember the situation with Isaac Seumalo a couple of years ago, this was a really good player, a Pro Bowl player, a player who Adam and I went to the combine and had teams say, "Hey, this guy is the number one guard / center on our board," but he didn't. Yeah, he was the outlier the other way. He actually got, I think, only a 1-year deal from the Steelers or something structured like that because of his injury history and because, people just weren't sure. Mekhi, it's not about injury. It's about experience and change of position and all the environment. But it's still the same thing where you could have the guy. That's where evaluation and valuation change. You can evaluate him as one of the best guys out there, but your valuation, because of your concerns, might take it really low. So I think he'll be fascinating case study.
100% agree. Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, great stuff. So that is Zack Baun, and that is Mekhi Becton. And if we're doing our best, guesswork based on the data, I think Eagles fans, Sam, would be, if you reversed it and you said Zack Baun more likely to go, Becton more likely to stay. That's option A. Option B is Baun stays, Becton goes. Don't you think most Eagles fans would be happier with B? Baun stays, Becton goes.
100%. I think Baun is the priority guy. I think 100%.
Yeah. I mean, let's face it, the team has a much better draft and develop record on the O-line than at linebacker. So you might as well keep the good one that you signed and at least develop for a year. All right, great stuff. That's going to be part 1. In part 2, we'll come back. We will talk about the 2 other major free agents, and they're both pass rushers, Josh Sweat, Milton Williams. So for Sam Finkel, I'm Geoff Mosher. You've been watching a special analytics-based edition of Inside the Birds.